Hi, my name is Scott, and I'm an alcoholic. I've done the work out of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous with several Big Book Step Study sponsors in God as I understand God. This is actually my first time at this meeting. I happened to told Tina this morning that the address in the on the website for Worcester Intergroup is actually incorrect. When you type in this meeting, when you click on this meeting, it takes you to 16 Hamilton Road. So my experience so far is I got lost on my way here. I want to thank Tina for asking me to speak here. Tina stopped by my group and spoke, and I think it was somewhere around November or December. And the first thing that she said was that she never asked what step that she's on, so that she's fresh. When she gets to speak at the podium, she's fresh. And I usually don't practice that kind of thing, but when she sent me a text saying, "Is there any questions?" the last thing I was going to do is saying, like, "Yeah, what step are we on?" So I YouTubed it and found out what step you're on. I'm like, great, 6 and 7, favorite steps. I'm a member of the Marlboro Sunday night Pathway to Recovery Big Book Step Study meeting. We meet every Sunday night at 7 at the Ark. You're all welcome to join in. And it's a fun meeting. There's a lot of There's a lot of levity, a lot of laughter, and it's a really cool meeting. So if you're ever up in that area, please stop by and say hi. So a little bit about me, real quick. I went to my very first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous on July 23rd, 1994. I was 26 years old, and I knew nothing about alcoholism. I did not have alcoholism in my family. I did not know anybody from Alcoholics Anonymous. Literally, I called Central Service, and they directed me to that meeting. And a couple things I did know. One was that I could not stop drinking, and two was I could not stop starting. And I could see my life was very quickly tumbling down the road. And I was all out of options, and I didn't know if I liked what I saw, but I was desperate. So at that meeting, they handed me this book right here, the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. This is the actual one, this relic. And they told me to go home and read the stories in the back of the book. And I did that. And I've been going to these stupid meetings ever since. My sobriety date is the day of my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I took right to it, and I got sober right away. And how I got sober was, the most obvious way that you hear in the halls of Alcoholics Anonymous. I joined a group of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I got involved in that group. And if this is your first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, welcome. What helped me get sober was getting involved. I got a sponsor. I was introduced to Big Book very early on. My first sponsor, Don B., I don't know if he'd been through this particular process, but he had gone through the steps via the Big Book. But there were a few other people that were in my orbit that had done the Big Book Step Study process. And I would see them in other meetings, and I was very impressed with the message that they carried. My introduction to Big Book Step Study was shortly after my 1 year of sobriety. I was already working with my sponsor on the steps, and I was, as most people are in their second year, floundering on my fourth step. I was more interested in chasing girls than I was chasing God, and I'm a human being. I was 27 years old, and he told me to go to these Big Book Step Study meetings, and he goes, "That'll put the fear of God in you." And so I went to one of these meetings, and they were on the fear part of the fourth step, and I was blown away. I was absolutely blown away. My first Big Book Step Study meeting was the Brookline Friday night Big Book Step Study meeting. If you're ever in that area, that group has gotten very small, so stop in and say hi. They are looking for more members. And I was so impressed, I almost quit my home group the Austin Friday Night group and joined that group. I almost did, but I didn't. I went a couple of years. And the physical abstinence from alcohol was wonderful as far as like all the outside stuff in my life came together in a great way. Next thing I know, I've got a promotion at my job, I get a raise, I'm living in a cool apartment with a bunch of guys. I had the respect of my friends and my family. I was a singer in a rock band, and I was going into a recording studio to record, and that wasn't even on my list of things to do. You know, it just ended up happening. I should have been elated, but by the time I was in my 3rd year of sobriety, I was plotting my own suicide. I was planning on hanging myself. And that really, you know, like, my sponsor was telling me, get back into the steps, get back into the steps, get back into the steps. And one day, and it was probably around Valentine's Day in 1997, I bet you the attendance rate at Big Book Step Study meetings probably go up right around Valentine's Day. And I stopped showing up at the Elston Friday night meeting, and I showed up at that Brookline Big Book Step Study meeting, and I joined that group, and I've been involved with Big Book Step Study ever since. I have not been through the process since that. I took my 3rd step on Halloween night 1997. When I got a sponsor, I inhaled this information. I studied it like my life depended on it, and I bought into this stuff, hook, line, and sinker. And I started writing. And my experience is, obviously, I wrote a very long and very painful 4-step. It was way, way longer than it needed to be. And it was just what it was for me, you know. And I started to do my 5th step. I've done my 5th step twice, okay? And the first time I did my 5th step, I stopped right around the time I got to the end of my resentments. And the reason being is when I was first getting involved in this, okay, I kind of saw the 4th step like I was writing my own owner's manual, okay? I could not do life. I could not figure things out, okay? I did the best that I could was I watched other people and I tried to do what I thought they were doing or I thought that they were thinking or whatnot, okay? And I figured that if I did this 4-step, I was going to be magically transformed and to be able to negotiate my life at a better, with better results, more favorable results. That's what I thought was going to happen. Is I was still being the actor, as it talks about in the 3rd step. Okay, I was just going to, you know, rework my life, and it was going to be awesome. And what happened as I was going through the 5th step the first time was that was my mindset. I had no humility, okay? I was going to just take this information and run with it. And my sponsor, and he was a good sponsor too, he lived down on the Cape, and I would drive down to his house in Mashpee every single time I did a reading. So it was like an 1.5-hour drive to read to this guy for about 2 hours. Sometimes he'd fall asleep. And then I'd drive another 1.5 hours back home. You know, I mean, it was a long process I was going through, and I was getting to the end of my rope. And I think he realized that I was just here to try to negotiate myself. So he started to pry me with questions, and I had no answers because the fact of the matter was he was bringing up a way of life that was still at that point in time, and I had quite a few years of sobriety behind me, was still alien to me. Okay, because I still was the actor trying to arrange the set, trying to arrange the players, even though I'd been through, you know, all of this writing, and I was doing this 5th step. And I crashed. I broke down in tears, and I finished that day, and I got up and I walked out of that house, and I've never been back since. Okay, and that was somewhere around 2008 or something like that. And I did not leave Big Book Step Study meetings. I still continued to go to these meetings, but I sat here for 5 years and said, I listened. And that's what I did. And a lot of people who were like anxious to see me go forward were like, you know, what's the deal? And I was just like, I don't want to talk about it. And I sat here for about 5 years in these halls just listening. Bad things didn't really happen. What happened was I had gotten a little bit of an inheritance. I put a down payment on a condo in Marlboro, and because I'm a good AA member, I joined the group closest to my house, and it was the Marlboro Sunday Night Big Book Step Study meeting, and I got involved in that group almost instantly. A guy had noticed that, because him and I were doing service together, and he noticed that I was really solid with this big book knowledge. I mean, all I have to do is take a look at my big book in the apartment and open it. Okay, I have loved this book. Okay, but he also, through conversation, had learned that I had done a bunch of this work and then I stopped. And one day while we were driving towards a, I don't know, a service meeting or something like that, he's just like, he's like, Scott, let's just get this thing done. Let's move forward with this. And it was the right time, it was the right words, and it was the right guy. I said, will you sponsor me through this? He said, yes. Because at that point in time, for the first time in my life, I really felt like I had settled down. I had bought a house, or not a house, but a condo, and I had made this commitment to myself to an extent that I had never made that kind of commitment with another human being. And I wanted to, kind of spread my roots. So I was ready, he was ready, I'd done a little bit more writing, and I started doing my fifth step again with this guy. Now, I still had that same mindset, that whole negotiate my life mindset, okay? This God thing is great, but, Scott's the man in charge. I'm the guy in charge, okay? My relationship with God, I'm a believer with agnostic tendencies. It talks about that in the chapter of being agnostic, okay? What that means in English is my relationship with God is contingent upon conditions, okay? In fact, my relationship with everything, you could probably say, is contingent on conditions. So with God, if things are going great and I'm happy and everything's going the way I want it, God is good, let's all join hands and sing Kumbaya and whatnot, okay? But if things aren't going well and I'm in pain and my life is not going the way that I planned it to be, then all of a sudden that relationship suffers, okay? What was going on in my life at this point in time as I was getting around to, reinvesting myself in this work, I had injured my left shoulder. I'm a very physical guy. I work in landscaping, and I'm also an artist. I work out in the gym. I actually have my own gym gear and my own private gym room in my condo. And when I injured my left shoulder, I had to stop working out. It affected my ability to, function at my job properly. And the injury that I got was weird, and it's the area where the clavicle meets the scapula is kind of chipped and jagged, and it's still chipped and jagged, and it still bothers me. And I remember sitting there, and I was in pain. I was in a lot of pain, and I was just like, thank God it wasn't my right arm, because I'm right-handed, and like I said, I'm an artist, and sometimes I get jobs drawing things, and in 2013, it was my right shoulder, over and over and over again. At this point in time, I just started getting back invested in this stuff, and I started having accidents and injuries on my right shoulder. By the time I started my fifth step, my right shoulder blade, because there was so much inflammation around it, was out of position. I had shoulder impingement syndrome in both of my shoulders, and I had torn the long head of my right biceps. I was mangled, and the thing was every single time I would have an injury, my first reaction was to take charge and to negotiate things, to try to, keep myself from being injured or make my injury worse. And, I'm a sharp guy, I'm a careful guy, but it was like almost weekly something else would happen, and it was completely out of my power, okay? So what happened was I realized that I had no control over this. I was getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. I stopped drawing. By the time I started reading my fifth step to my current sponsor, I couldn't even lift my right arm because like I said, tore the bicep in my shoulder. And one thing was very clear, that I could not negotiate God's world to save my life, okay? This was God's world, and that really aggravated me because that was the only thing I knew. That's what made sense to me. I had to be in control because I couldn't think or possibly visualize anything different. And because things were going bad and because I was in a lot of pain, it affected my relationship with God. And it kept on getting worse and worse and worse. So I started reading my four-step to my four-step to my sponsor. And I would show up and he would have me do the third step prayer, which I love. I say the third step prayer several times throughout the day. And this thing called the set-aside prayer, which I despised because it wasn't conference-approved prayers. I'm a good AA member. I've been through service, and that stuff just gnaws at me. And then we'd get reading, and like I said, there were periods of times where I could barely hold my notebook in my lap because I had no strength in my right arm to even turn the page. I just let it dangle there. I was in so much pain. And this went on and on and on and on. It took me about a year to read my fifth step to my sponsor, and this was, getting together with him once or twice a week, whether it be in his car or at the ACK, or sometimes at his house. He has this nice little house on the lake, which is a great place to read a four-step. That was just what we did. We just went through it. Now, as I was doing this, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, eventually I'm going to get through this. I'm going to do step 6 and 7. I'm going to start, I'm going to make that list and start making amends. And I'm going to be able to start speaking at these meetings, and I'm going to be able to start sponsoring men. And when I would look at step 6 and 7, when you look at step 6 and 7 in the big book, it's 2 paragraphs. It's 2 very short paragraphs. And I'm like, what the hell am I going to talk about on step 6 and 7? It's 2 paragraphs. Now, my mind is the guy that wants to try to negotiate things, okay? I want to manipulate things. I want to be in control of things, okay? So what my plan was going to be was I was going to take the 12 and 12 because they've got good solid pages on step 6 and 7, and I was going to study the crap out of it. And then when I spoke to you folks, I would just pontificate. Okay, that was my plan, okay? But the thing is, and if this is your first Big Book Step Study meeting, or if you're familiar with Big Book Step Study, okay, and you wonder why, you have to be through the process in order to qualify and speak at these meetings, there's a couple of reasons why. One is to preserve the message of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, okay? It's very common for people to kind of throw in their own, 2 cents on stuff. After years and years and years of doing that, that can change the message. Okay, this was the stuff that originally, the first 100 drunks had come up with, and all of a sudden, Big Book was this thing that, you won at the raffle at a meeting. Who cares about what's inside of it? It makes a really good coffee thing. And then Big Book Step Study came around, and here we are, talking about it. But the other thing is, by the time a guy like me or a person that speaks in these meetings qualifies to speak at a Big Book Step Study meeting, it's because they have an actual experience on all 12 steps. I was telling Tina earlier, I'm like, if all your experience was for steps 10 and 11 was reading pages 84 to 88 in the Big Book while you were doing your turnarounds, and then you finish doing your step work and you get called to speak on steps like 11, that's your experience. I read pages 84 to 88 as I was doing my turnarounds. That's my experience. Thank you. So I didn't have an experience with step 7 or step 6. I can't imagine, how can you have an experience on 2 short little paragraphs? So those are the thoughts that are going on in my mind because I'm a guy that wants to be in control of stuff. As I told you, I YouTubed what step we were on, okay? So just because I needed to have a sense of mental framework to work with. And the other thing that was bothering me was the fact that my job as a sponsor is to deliver my sponsees, hands into the hands of God as he understands God, okay? And as I mentioned earlier, my relationship with God is conditional. Okay? It's conditional on how I felt. And like I said, I was in a lot of pain. I was in a lot of physical pain. I had no control over that physical pain. And I was blaming God, and I was really, really pissed at him. I mean, I was pissed, and my sponsor was having a wonderful time listening to me news about it, too. I'd sit there, I'm like, Gary, we're not going to call him God anymore. We're going to call him Doorknob, okay? So we're going to pray to Doorknob. He would just sit there and smile. He's like, all right, let's say that third step prayer. All right, let's say that set-aside prayer. All right, Scott, start reading. And he would just sit there and kind of nod with a smile on his face. And I would get through it. But when I got to the day where I was reading my last set of sex turnarounds, and I knew this was my last reading, I'm going to be doing step 6 and 7, I'm still thinking to myself, I'm like, I'm still really pissed off at God, because this whole shoulder thing, I mean, I wasn't in as much pain, but still, it's just, anybody who's had shoulder injuries know that, if you snap your arm the wrong way, you're going to be in pain for a couple of days, okay? And I did not go through the surgery. And I didn't bother with prescription drugs. I felt every iota of that pain. And a lot of sleepless nights, too. And as I'm driving to that last reading with my sponsor, I'm like, how the hell am I going to sponsor another guy? And I got there, and I read the rest of my sex turnarounds, and my sponsor said, is there anything else? And there were a couple things on my mind. I discussed them with my sponsor, and he didn't give me a hug. He shook my hand. He knew that I couldn't hug because of my shoulders, and he goes, welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I got into my car, and I'm at the stoplight, and I'm like, I'm still pissed at God. And I'm like, all right, well, we're just going to move forward with this. And the directions are, you take a book off a shelf. My book was on my coffee table. I didn't bother putting it on the shelf. And that stuff is cute, but it's not really necessary. So I get in my my home, and I actually lit a candle for God. And I sat there and did my hour with God. Now, the interesting thing was, the entire time I had my hour with God, I was misty-eyed. I actually wept. I was like, really, there was something inside me that had moved, and I don't know where it came from. And the entire time, I had the biggest shitty grin on my face. I mean, I'd done it. I had gotten through this, and it's time to move forward. And I got down, and at the end of this this whole thing, and I lost my place in the book. Okay, so I got down, and the candle's still lit, and I said, my Creator, I'm now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. Now, that sentence in itself, what I've discovered is what I'm doing is making an admission. Okay? I'm not saying, because I already made a decision to turn my will and my life over to care of my higher power. I did that in the third step. These words are very different. It says, my Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me. One thing that became painfully and laughably apparent to me at that point in time in my life was my Creator already had me. He's had me since the day I was born. Okay? What I'm doing when I'm making this I'm making an admission like, yes, you have me. I am yours. You've always had me. Okay? I have always been yours. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen. It's the only place in the big book where it says amen. Okay? That was the whole point of this. When I took my third step prayer on Halloween night in 1997, I was making a contract with my sponsor at that time and the God of my understanding, which at that point in time was a flimsy reed, that I was gonna do this work, and that God was gonna solve my problems. I'm gonna be an example, and that I've made a contract that I was going to help other alcoholics through this. Okay, so what I'm saying in this step is, I pray that you remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness. Okay. That's what God's going to remove. That's what I'm praying for. That's what he's going to remove. All the other defects of character that I got, which is plenty, trust me, my fourth step is about this tall off the table. I've got the whole rest of my life to work on that, okay? God is going to remove the stuff that stands in the way of me being useful. And that's what I learned, because after I got done saying that, and I put the candle out and I said, done, now what's next? I mean, I probably did whatever Scott does, which is I either eat something or I draw something. I mean, I can't remember what I did after I did my 6th and 7th. But I'll tell you one thing. When I woke up the next morning, all of that anger and all of that issue that I had with God was gone. I mean, it was gone. I couldn't even force a dark thought towards God. And it's been several years now, and by the way, I've had plenty of shoulder issues since then, and my feelings towards God have never wavered, okay? I changed. Somewhere in that little paragraph there, Scott changed, okay? My relationship with God is no longer a conditional one, okay? It is just solid. Okay, and that was the first thing that I noticed that changed about me, was the fact that that relationship with God had all of a sudden been cemented right then and there, that time. And there were a few other things I started to notice. One was a certain, I felt a little bit more comfortable around people. I've always had a difficult time around people, and all of a sudden I felt a little bit more comfortable, and that's been getting easier. But another thing that was removed is when I did get around to actually sponsoring another man through these steps, okay, I had an issue. When I took that 3rd step prayer, I didn't really want to sponsor anybody. And the reason being is because I was very, very intimidated by like Big Book Step Study speakers. I was very intimidated by them because I could not imagine having that level of, understanding of the steps, or understanding of themselves, or having an understanding of another human being. Okay, it felt like a lot of pressure, and I didn't want to be involved in that. All of that was removed. When I started working with another alcoholic, especially when I got to the part of the turnarounds with him, and I work with him and I'm reading his stuff, all of a sudden I'm reading it with a level of clarity that I did not have and could not grant myself. It was just there, okay? And that was a gift from God, okay? And it's a gift that I'm able to bestow on another human being. That's my experience with step 6 and 7. I'm serious. I don't really have much more to talk about. The fact of the matter was it changed. This was a game changer for me, and I didn't expect it, okay? Like I said, I was planning on, pontificating on stuff from the 12 and 12, and all of a sudden, I actually have an experience that I was able to share on this that was uniquely mine, and it was based off of what I saw and what I experienced. The 4-step for me, when I first got involved in this stuff, everybody were talking about 4 steps in pounds. Okay, I had a 14-pound 4-step. It doesn't have to be that way. Okay, I thought the 4-step was going to cure me. All it is just, it's a document. I mean, obviously there's notebooks. It's full of stuff. You got instructions. You follow it, and God's going to write it for you because God wrote it for me. All right, but it doesn't have to be this tall, It's just, this stuff has got to be simple because I'm an alcoholic, and if I go to my own devices, I'm going to want to control things, and I'm going to complicate it while doing it. So by going towards the instructions, by staying towards the sponsor, and staying towards the actual stuff that's written in here, it makes it a lot easier, and it doesn't have to be difficult. All of this stuff is simple stuff because we're alcoholics and we've got complicated lives. We've got interesting lives, and we need to be able to live our lives, and that's what I get to do these days nowadays. So that's my experience with the 6th and 7th step, and thank you very much.